What's up, guys, and welcome back to a Market Watch Wednesday here on the InkCast. And we're going to be jumping into all of these cards. We finally have some data around set 5. So yeah, I may have misjudged a card or two, and we'll talk about that when we get there. But we're going to be looking at the ones that went up, the ones that went down, and the ones you should be looking at because they are the top sellers right now. All right, so before we jump into the next card on the list, I just want to throw out the fact that Set 5 is releasing this upcoming Friday. So yes, a lot of people already got their boxes. They've opened their cards from, your LGS that they bought from or TCG Player. Again, if you need any of these cards, link down below. Use that affiliate link. It's good for us. It's good for you. Just click the link. But anyway, when you go through that, you're going to be able to see that these prices are going to be moving a lot over the next couple weeks. The fact that we have the next set of DLCs coming up with these cards is going to really affect the market. So just be aware. Some of these cards could go up even more. Some of these cards could go way, way down. You just never know. It's going to come down to what top 8s at all these DLCs. Yes, your favorite streamer or YouTube creator may be using certain decks and certain cards right now, but that may not be the deck that they actually choose to take to the DLC, and that may not be the deck that makes the top 8. Top 8s are what drives prices, so just really, really keep that in mind when you're looking at these, because this market right now is definitely going to be volatile, and any of these cards could definitely take a nosedive off the cliff, or there could be some sleepers in here that skyrocket, and just we'll have to see once we get there. So with that being said, let's jump into our first card, and our first card is Cusco. Now, I know your Breezy is going to be happy to see that this card is going up, and this card is showing up in a lot of the Blurple decks, as well as occasionally you'll see it in some of the other Sapphire, whether it's Sapphire Steel or Sapphire Ruby, but definitely been seeing him a lot in the Blurple decks kind of going around, which is the blue-purple decks, the Sapphire, Amethyst. And this card is $1.84. That is a 20% increase this week. And again, it's hard to judge the prices because this is the first week that we have any data. So just keep that in mind when I'm using these percentages, just because we're going to see those be very variable in the upcoming weeks. All right. And so moving from Cusco to our next card, we have Chicha. Chicha is also $3.24, and that is up almost 30% for the last week. This is another one of those cards that's really starting to make her way into a lot of the ramp decks. Again, she's really good, and you're going to be able to draw cards when you're inking that second card. So any card or any deck that's going to be running, Quill or something like that, you're going to get some value off this card, which was pretty expected. Now, this card is a rare, so realistically, your top end on this card is probably about $5. Again, if we've looked at any of the rares in the past that were used in a bunch of different decks, like Flynn or Sisu or any of those, your $5 mark is about where it's going to end up. So it could go up even further than that, maybe $8 or something like that, but it'll probably end up around $5 when it finally levels out. All right, so next up on our list, this is the one I may have miscalled for now. I'm still going to say for now, but Clarabelle, light on her hooves, definitely has skyrocketed over the last week or so. I know in our last Market Watch, I said she probably wouldn't go up too high, and then the market corrected me, and she is $30 at this point. So almost $31. And that is a huge increase over the last week. So 30% going up. I still think that this card is being, I won't say overhyped, because I do think this is a really good card in the right situations. My brain was specifically stuck in the old Emerald Bucky meta with discard, meaning she's not going to give you a lot of value if they don't have a lot of cards in hand, but I can see this card being pretty good mid to late game as you're going through. You guys pointed out in comments that she has quite a few good shift targets, and after playing with her a little bit over this past weekend, I do agree that she does have more value there. Will she stay at $30? I'm not sure. I don't think she's going to go much above that. Looking back at all of the legendaries that we have in previous sets, there's only a couple cards that really have broken that $30 mark and stayed, that being Robin Hood and Beast. Is she at that level? I'm not sure. But at this point, she's $30. I would probably say if you can get them for, $25 or somewhere around in there, it's probably a good investment because she's going to stay anywhere from 25 to 30 for the time being. Now, she could go up if she ends up in some top 8 deck as a 4 of. Keep in mind, you really need to be a 4 of a card to have that price. Look at Diablo being $30. It's a 4 of. Beast being 4 ofs in most decks. Robin Hood being a 4 of in most decks. Those are why those cards are so expensive. Whereas if you look at some of the other cards, like let's say Lucky Dime, it's a 2 of in decks, which keeps its price down, and it's not being used in multiple decks. Now, another card that's been moving really heavily in set 5 is Elsa the Fifth Spirit. Now, this card is a $4 card, so it's $4.04, but that is a 40% increase over the last 7 days. A lot of people are looking at this card because it is an answer to some of the aggro decks, and so we are seeing a lot more play of this card, or at least experimentation on this card. And again, most of that's thanks to the Blurple decks that are going around. A lot of people are saying that's kind of a top deck right now. So because of that, she is going up. Will she stay up? We'll have to see how Blurple's going to end up at this next DLC. But at this point, the deck looks pretty good, and these cards are going to be some of the staples that are found in it. All right, so moving on from the set 5 cards and kind of looking at the overall atmosphere of Lorcana. Yeah, the aggro decks are still going up. Now, what's funny is we've had a couple 1Ks over the last weekend or two, and none of the aggro decks are in the top 4, but people are still migrating to this deck. We said it before a couple weeks ago, when you have other games like Magic and things like that, your first couple weeks, a lot of people just go for the easy deck. They don't want to have to think about, what do you need to play here and there and all of these different play lines. So they go to things like mono red, goblins, go wide, white weenie strategy, things like that when it comes to Magic. And that's what we're seeing here in Lorcana as well. A lot of people are picking up this deck, the Amber Amethyst aggro deck, and we're seeing that with the prices of some of these cards. Piglet's continuing to go up. So Piglet is a $4.46 card. So again, almost $4.50 at this point, but that's still another 35% since we looked at it last week. So this card is just continuing to rise. And honestly, so if aggro sticks around, this card is still going to go up, and we're seeing that now. It's a great card. If you haven't picked him up, you definitely probably want to look at him at this point. So sticking on that line, we have Maleficent biding her time. We've talked about her for the past few weeks. Again, she's continuing to still go up. She's a $9 card, and that is a 21% increase over the last 7 days. So another one of those cards that's just continuing to go up because the aggro is where people are going. Now, she has found some use in some of the Blurple decks that I've seen posted. Not all are using the 1-drop lines, and they're kind of that mid-rangey deck. But if you need something early, this is a great card, and this is the reason why she's continuing to go up. And lastly, the other 1-drop that we're seeing is Lilo. So Lilo is $7.50. That is 16% increase over the last 7 days. Again, it's just all about that aggro 1-drops having a bunch of 1-drops that tap for 2. Piglet being a 2-drop that taps for 3. It's really good. So the card's great. It's also first chapter, just like Maleficent. So again, with product drying up, if you don't have them, there is a chance that these continue to go up. If aggro just completely goes away because we've figured out Steel Song or whatever keeps it at bay, then these cards do have a chance of dropping down. Now, I think $5 is probably their floor. I don't think they're really going to go below the $5 just because of the fact that it is first chapter. It's going to be harder to find them in the future. And yeah, once people have them, they're probably not going to try to go and sell them or anything like that. So just keep that in mind. Right now, it is $7.50, but we'll have to see what happens over the next couple of weeks in the DLCs to see if these cards continue to go up or if we start to see that leveling off of price or even potentially a little bit of a drop down, to $5, maybe minus $2 or something like that. All right, so one more card with that kind of aggro package or even the Blurple package. We're seeing Arthur, Wizard's Apprentice, really make a comeback. I say a comeback because Arthur was such a great card when we were in set 2, really with that bounce aggro package. And so people are starting to pull him out, put him in those decks, whether it's Blurple getting a lot of value out of the bounces. Again, think of that blue Merlin being able to search for any card in your deck that's being shifted on top of your goat or rabbit just to make sure that you can do that. And then Arthur bouncing them back so then you can replay your goat. It's pretty good synergy. So this card is $1.94, and that is a 14% increase over the last 7 days. So still a good card, still kind of being around. I'm not sure if it's going to go up to $3 or $4 like it was at one point, but it's definitely one of those cards that maybe has some room to grow, maybe another dollar or two, depending on how well this deck does. And so speaking of decks that are doing well, we still have the Under the Sea deck doing very, very well, as we've looked at some of the decks that are top 8ing some of the local tournaments. And so this card is also continuing to go up. Now, this card is 50 cents right now. I know that doesn't sound like a lot, but that is a 25% increase over the last 7 days. It's not one of those cards that's going to be a be prepared or anything like that level of play, but with aggro being everywhere right now and the way that you can bring down power on your opponents, this is something where this card, it's playable. It's a good card, and it's more of an indication of what the meta is looking right. So at this point, yeah, 50 cents, but we can still see that it is going up over time. So that means people are picking these up. People are considering playing this deck. So just be on the lookout if you're playing at their locals or you're going to the next DLC. This could still be a big deck that you see everywhere. So speaking of cards that are showing up because of the meta, we have Goofy the Super Goof. And yeah, this card is only 61 cents, but it's increased 40% over the last 7 days. Just another card that's indicating this isn't a card where you're going to go and buy up a whole bunch of copies and make a bunch of monies flipping it or anything like that. But it is just a card to be aware that it's starting to show up in a lot of decks to handle a lot of these little cards. It's got Rush, you know, it's the mini Maui, and you're gaining lore when you're doing it. So just be really aware of this, just like where Goat wins a game out of nowhere because it gets played, bounced back, and played for 2 lore. Goofy has that same ability if you're seeing any type of, Ruby deck. And again, there's probably going to be some type of Ruby aggro deck that pops up at some point, and this will be a card that's in it. All right, so we have a couple other cards that are showing up and moving around on the market right now, and one of these is Cinderella Stout-Hearted. Now, again, this is one of those cards that's kind of come in and out of a lot of decks, but we are starting to continue to see this card be played in Steel Song. It's a top-end card that's actually really hard to remove unless you have, a complete removal spell like in Ruby, and this is the reason why it's coming down. The resist on it is amazing. It taps for a lot of lore, and this card is $2.33. Now, that is a 23% increase this week. So as you can see, that's going to make a big difference when people are picking them up. And there's a potential that this card could continue to rise if we see that Steel Song is the deck of choice in these top DLCs. Now we have a spicy one here, and this is Beast Relentless. Again, I think this card's kind of showing up in some of the Emerald decks that are trying new things. Beast untaps when you have damage to one of your opponent's characters. And again, I don't think this is the whole Beast plus Sheriff of Nottingham, trick with Bayou. I think honestly, this is potentially people just kind of running this card in the fact that you have a lot of aggro decks. You can literally just pick off their characters when you're attacking into them or whatever it may be, untap the Beast, quest them again, and then continuing to get a lot of lore just in one turn. So this card is $5.80, and that is almost a 10% increase over the last 7 days. Again, not one of the biggest cards being used, but it is something to have on your radar. Now, that doesn't mean they're not putting in the combo with Sheriff, so be aware that the deck can get pretty crazy when you do that, and that may just be a secondary win condition that's popped into the decks. So just be aware, it is a card that's moving, and it's a spicy one that a lot of people haven't seen in a long time. So if you're not prepared for it and you're not telegraphing that particular combo, you can win at it. You can lose essentially out of nowhere. Another card we haven't seen in a long time is Let It Go. Now this used to be a premium removal spell when we were in set 1 and even into set 2. But once we got to 3 and 4 with all of the Ruby stuff that was happening, most people got off of Sapphire's removal and they were putting in whether it was Steel as your secondary color or Ruby as your secondary color to really handle removing characters. Because we have Blurple coming up as a deck, It really doesn't have great removal outside of like a sneaky Madam Mim Fox, and so Let It Go has started to come back up. I will also say that I've seen Hades pop up a couple times as well in some of these lists, but he didn't make the list today. So Let It Go is $2.60, and that is a 25% increase over the last 7 days. This is a huge indicator to me that Blurple is the colors that a lot of people are looking at and taking to their local 1Ks or the DLCs that are coming up. So just be prepared for the deck. It runs on a whole different axis than what we've really seen with some of the other decks. So you really need to be prepared for it, or you're not going to know what's going on with the deck, and then they're going to win before you really have something or time to counter what they're doing. All right, and the last card of the going ups is Rapunzel. I feel like we talk about Rapunzel all the time, but this card is $48, and that is another 8% increase over the last 7 days. This is just one of those staple cards. Even though you don't see her getting played too much, yes, she is in the Steel Song decks, which is what's driving her price up. She just continues to be a great card that everybody wants to pick up. So if you don't have them, I don't know if this card is ever going to come back down unless it gets reprinted. And honestly, I'm not sure if that's going to happen. So I would just make sure you're keeping an eye on it if you don't have your play sets. But this card is just a great card. It's always going to be around. And every now and then you'll see it pop up in some of the top decks, depending on what the colors are of that month. All right, so I'm interrupting this just real quick to tell you about our giveaway. Yep, it's one of these bad boys. It's the D23 collection. If you guys haven't seen it, they were limited in where you could purchase them, whether it was the parks or one of the Disney stores out there. Yes, we got ours over at Disney Springs, and I believe they're sold out at this point. So we're going to be giving this thing away, and it's super easy to get it. All you have to do is go down below, make sure you're subbed, and leave a comment on a video. It's super easy. Every video that you comment on is an entry for this, whether it's an older video or a newer video. I've got the timestamps now. We'll be pulling all new comments, and each one of those is going to get you an entry to win this thing. So on September 6th, so you got about 2 weeks to do that, we're going to be pulling a name, and somebody is going to be getting this shipped out to them. So I'll return you to your video right now. All right, so next up is those biggest losers, or the cards that are going down at this point. And what I want to kind of put here is this is really just the market stabilizing at this point, some decks shifting. So just be aware as we look at that. I've got the list below. You can see all the different sets. These are all the cards that are over $3. And you can see that there's way more red on the screen than green. And that really is because the market is just stabilizing as we're shifting to the new meta. This is going to change heavily in the next couple weeks. So just keep in mind, there's going to be a lot more cards that go down over the next few weeks compared to a lot of the cards that are going to go up. All right, so the first one I'm going to look at is Mufasa. Now, Mufasa is one of those cards that everybody said, and I believe is one of the best cards in set 5. It's currently $27.68, but that weekly changes, it lost 17%. Now, this is kind of expected. I even mentioned this in some of the other videos. This is an amazing and a great card, but what we're finding is it's not a 4 of. It's not Tamatoa. That's specifically where the deck is built all around it. It's more of a 2 of or a 3 of in the deck. Now, I don't think that this card is like Lucky Dime and goes way down to that level, but I do think that this is probably a $20 to $25 card. Yes, it could get up to 30 just because people can't find them and people are buying them up or whatever. But because it's a 2 of in the deck, if you just wait, it will stabilize around the $25 mark. And eventually, depending on what becomes the best cards in the meta, could go down a little bit further if it's not being used in one of the top decks. And going on that same line is Prince Naveen. Prince Naveen, an amazing card. His ability when he hits could be huge if you have the spell in your hand, but the same thing we said before is it's not really a 4 of. It's ended up being a 2 or a 3 of in most of the decks we're seeing just because of the limitations on the songs that you can play with them. And because of that, he's $33. Now that is a 16% drop over the last 7 days. And I do imagine this coming down even further. Just like Mufasa, I think this is a $25 card. Yes, it's probably going to stay at the $30 mark for a little while just because of supply and demand. And again, I do feel like we're going to see some Steel Song as we get into the DLCs, which will have most likely 2 in their deck of Naveen. So this is a card that's going to kind of be at that $25 for a little bit, probably $30 for a little bit from those, but eventually I do see it dropping a little bit further. It's a great card. It's just, again, not a 4 of, and because of that, I don't think it's going to be a $30 card. And so looking past set 5 at a couple of the older cards that are dropping, we've got Flynn Rider. Now he's been steadily dropping over the last couple weeks, and at this point he's $3. He's $3, and that is, a 31% drop over the last 7 days. And it makes sense. A lot of people are not running Flynn anymore. Like I mentioned before, he is a 2/2. He can get removed, but at this point in where the meta's going, he's just not going to trigger as much as he was before. He triggered a lot in the last set because of the meta being a lot of those ramp decks that didn't have anything early. And, Sisu coming down on 3 was always a great combo. But at this point, based on where the meta's going, he just doesn't stick around long enough and maybe gets 1 trigger if you're lucky. And continuing down that same path of cards that just aren't getting used anymore, we have Scar, the Vicious Cheater. Now, it's still $4.43, but this is a 16% decrease over the last week. He's just fallen out of favor. He was really big in the Ruby Sapphire ramp decks as essentially another Be Prepared, but with a lot of these decks, like a Blurple deck, not really leaving their cards tapped, or the other meta decks out there, he's just not being used so much. So he was, close to $16 at his prime, and right now he's at $4, and realistically, he's probably going to drop down to $3, $2, somewhere around in there over time. Now, he could show up. We could get some kind of crazy, Ruby deck that ends up being really good that brings him back. But at this point, we have so many choices for removal spells. He's just kind of towards the bottom of that list. So the last card that's going down that I want to look at is Ursula, Deceiver of All. We've seen some of the other Emerald cards like Diablo kind of bounce back, but Ursula really hasn't been able to right now. Again, I think right now it's because Emerald, because of the Bucky nerf or change or whatever you want to call it, at this point, it's made a lot of people look away from Emerald. Yes, we have Clarabelle really making her, stand in Emerald. So maybe this brings Ursula back a little bit. But at this point, she's $18. This is another 3% decrease over the last 7 days. But $18, pretty good. This card is still really, really great. You just got to find the right songs with it, which kind of pushes her into that Emerald Steel. And this is the reason why she's kind of so-so. She is showing up in the Amber Emerald decks with the Under the Sea and stuff, but there's just not as many cards. You've got Sudden Chill that you can use or something like that, but realistically, we just need a couple more songs. This card has the biggest upside, so you do want to keep an eye if you don't have your playsets, because as soon as they print a good 3-drop spell, whether it's in Emerald or one other color that she pairs well with, all of a sudden her stock's going to go way back up. So keep an eye on her. I still think this card is a great card. I don't know if it's a $30 card just because of the fact that she does have to matter about the songs you're using, but I do think that this is an easy $20 card all day long. And again, whatever the meta looks like, if we get a good song based on that, and Emerald seems to be the color of the meta, she's definitely going to go up. All right, so the last segment, guys, is always the best sellers. And again, for the next week or two, maybe a little bit further into that, we're just going to see a lot of set 5. Again, it's the top sellers. Everybody's pre-ordering cards. Everybody's buying cards as the product's getting out there. I still agree. I think buying singles is probably the best way to go in Lorcana. Find the deck you like. Use the link below. Click the TCG player to find your cards. But honestly, you're going to save a lot more money doing that than, cracking boxes or things like that, especially if you're looking for legendaries or super rares or something like that. If you just need a bunch of commons and uncommons, crack a box. You'll get a lot of your collection complete with that. But outside of that, any of the higher rarity stuff, you're just better off doing that, guaranteeing that you're going to get the card. And these are the top cards. So the top 3 best sellers, we have Elsa, which we talked about before. And again, I think it's this Blurple deck that's floating around. You got Madam Mim as well showing up in that deck as a couple of. So people are kind of looking there. And of course, you have Daisy. Daisy being one of the best new cards coming out that's not a legendary. She is a super rare. And again, 4 of in all of these aggro decks. You really don't care that the other player is drawing or potentially drawing extra cards when you're just turning everything sideways for 2 lore and you're gaining a bunch of lore really, really quickly in the aggro deck, you know, the Amber Amethyst type deck. You're also seeing her show up a little bit in Steel Song. Yes, Cinderella is probably better in the Steel Song deck, but you are seeing her there because she can get you 4 lore, usually before she's removed. Looking at the other top 10, you've got some other great cards out there. You got Mother Gothel, Cusco. We talked about that a little bit earlier. Chicha, kind of getting in there as well. But one card I will also point out is Pete, the games referee. Just keep in mind with Pete, there are 2 in the starter deck. So if you buy the starter deck, you already get 2 copies there. There's a few other cards that are okay in that starter deck. So just remember, if you bought one, you do already have 2 if you're looking at trading or buying singles or opening packs for that. And then number 9, yes, I'm not going to live this down for a little bit, is Clarabelle, one of the top sellers. Everybody's picking her up. And yes, she is continuing to go up. So we'll see what happens with all of these cards over the next couple weeks. Again, as set 5 stabilizes, as we start to see some really top lists to see what cards are being used. Right now, a lot of this is speculation. It's, streamers, YouTubers, again, nothing wrong with that. Playing certain decks and everybody saying, oh, these are the best cards. But just keep in mind, when it comes to DLCs, a lot of creators or a lot of, top end players are probably not sharing their deck until after those tournaments. If they found the best deck so far, especially with a brand new meta like this. So just keep that in mind. But we appreciate all you guys and everything you're doing. And make sure, if you haven't already done it, hit the sub button below, hit the follow, hit the like, all of that good stuff, and leave us a comment. What card are you excited about with set 5? Maybe we didn't talk about it on this particular video because I want to look at those. We're going to be doing some more deck techs going into next week. And I'm excited to really start playing with set 5 and seeing what it has to offer. Until next time, guys, I'll take it easy.